هذه ستكون دراسة التجارب في
in
ثلاث
the
بلدان.
experience in three countries and four experiences, and we will start with Lebanon, which will be today in two sessions, and Palestine tomorrow, and on Monday and Tuesday it will be about Yemen. Today we will have two sessions in this symposium. The first and the second one will talk about studying the experience of Hezbollah in Lebanon. In the first session, we have three academics, distinguished speakers. The first one will be for Dr. Ali Fadlallah about the vision, role, and the strategies. The second one will be for Dr. Bilal Al-Laqis on the experience and the political performance in the Lebanese context. And the third one will be the third paper will be about foreign relations and the regional role in the context of resistance for Dr. Mahmoud Haider, and then we will have a commentary on these papers by Dr. Mahmoud Al-Hudayli from Tunisia. I will introduce the speakers, the distinguished speakers who are going to speak for us today very briefly. The first one will be presented by Dr. Ali Fadlallah. Dr. Ali is a professor in political studies in the American University in Beirut, and he is also the teacher or professor of political sciences in the University of Beirut, and he is also a professor of Islamic studies in the university, and he is also he worked in the with the Lebanese army.
في ثلاثة غرف تحكيم هي مركز
And he
القاهرة.
also works in three arbitration centers in Cairo and the Mecca Center for Arbitration and Settlement and the Arab Unity for or Union for trade arbitration. And he is also an advisor in several issues, including the councils for elections in a number of countries, and he is also a trainer of the international humanitarian law with the Red Cross in Geneva, and he has a PhD in political sciences and international law from the Lebanese University, and he wrote a number of books, including Hezbollah, A Change of Course, and The Fair War, and The Legitimate War, and The War of Legitimacy, and a number of articles and other books. So the second speaker will be Dr. Bilal Ahmed Al-Laqis. He is from Baalbek city in Lebanon, and he has an BA in pure mathematics and a PhD in political sciences from the Lebanese University. He taught in university and he works in the public sphere. He has two books published about the Zionist, the Israeli course after the war of July 2016, and another one about the world order after in the post 9/11. He participated in a number of conferences and TV shows. The third speaker is Dr. Mahmoud Haider. He is a thinker, a researcher, and a professor in the modern philosophy and theoretical sophism. He has a number of books that were published that he wrote, more than 100 publications, and it is very difficult to list all of them, but some of his publications are philosophical ones, like the theology of victory and the post-secularism state and the open state, and a number of other publications that has to do with mysticism or Sufism, philosophy and poetry, and the political thought. He also has more than 100 other publications, and he co-authored a number of books in terms of democracy and Islamic movements, including Hezbollah, the question of citizenship, the ethics, the science of ethics, and the media. All of that will be part of the things that we're going to include under the name of the author in our website. As I mentioned, following the papers, we will have a commentator. It will be Dr. Hudayli Al-Mansar. He is the professor of French literature in the French University, and he is interested in the Arab and Islamic culture, and he is the head of Jalaluddin Rumi Center for Civilization Promotion. Dr. Mahmoud also is the head of the Delta Center for In-Depth Analysis, and he is also the chief editor-in-chief of the one of the publications that is interested in the Oriental studies. As I said, each speaker will have 25 minutes to speak about the paper. We will start with Mr. Ali Fadlallah, and he's going to speak about the role, the vision, and the strategies of Hezbollah. Then Mr. Ahmed Al-Laqis will talk about the role of Hezbollah in the Lebanese context, and then this third speaker will talk about the regional role and the strategies in the Lebanese context. Peace be upon you. Good morning, everyone. I hope that my voice is getting you very well. Thank you, Dr. Sami, and thank you for the efforts that you're making. And I know that such issues sometimes are problematic and controversial, and they raise more questions than answer questions. So thank you for this opportunity. I would like to also salute my dear speakers who are with us on this in this meeting and all the participants. I will set my timer in order to maintain the time. To speak briefly in 25 minutes, it will be a very difficult task to do. So I'm going to present some ideas that will be followed with the questions, maybe, because it will be difficult to cover the topic in 25 minutes, which is the vision and the strategies of Hezbollah. I will start immediately without any further ado. In definition, Hezbollah, according to its own definition, it is a movement, a jihadi movement that practice politics. This is the definition that Hezbollah has set to itself, and that is present for a long time. And that incites us to discuss this issue. And there are two figures, Clausewitz and Michel Foucault, discussed that. Clausewitz is said that war is a continuation of politics in other means, whereas Michel Foucault, the well-known French philosopher, he said that politics is a continuation of war within other means. We can't look at Hezbollah without taking into consideration two dimensions, one that has to do with the heritage and history, and the other one that has to do with the beginning of civilization and in 1982. Very briefly and concisively, we can say that the trigger for Hezbollah was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. The Israeli forces invaded Lebanon, and it almost occupied half of Lebanon and reached the capital city of Beirut. My friend from Turkey, Abu Amir, told me that the first tank that got from An-Naqura, from the south of Lebanon, with the borders with Palestine, that tank, the first tank, reached Beirut. So it was a huge invasion to Lebanon. The conditions that started or appeared after the invasion were very difficult. The Palestinian resistance withdrew to Tunisia. and it's turned out to be a defeat, a severe defeat to Lebanon. And people, for example, used to paint the lights of their cars, the headlights of their cars, with a blue color in order to protect them from the Israeli air raids. And I believe that there was a photo that was very that was distributed largely with or showing Israeli leaders in the presidential palace in Beirut. So what happened in '82 was a very a strong blow. After this invasion, there was a plane that includes different people from the prospect or from the spectrum of the Lebanese people that went to Tehran to participate in a conference of the vulnerable people. They were not told that the invasion happened in Beirut. They were told after the plane took off from Beirut. At the time, there was a kind of there was a sentiment that there was a kind of defeat at the region. With a small number of people, the decision was made to start to launch the resistance with a jihadi movement. I know the conditions at the time and how this happened. On one side, we had an occupation, Israeli occupation to half of Beirut, of Lebanon. There were some resistance, for example, in Al-Shaqif, in Khalde, Sultan Yaqub, Al-Drej, Hamdoun, but the invasion was at a larger scale. And there was a defeat at the psychological level, at least, and there was also some kind of coordination that led Bashir Jmayel to be in to the presidency of Lebanon, and later we have evidence that this was a coordinated invasion and not by chance. Also, there was a civil war, and also a civil war. It doesn't mean an infights within the components of Syria, but it is a civic war rather than the translation that we have in Arabic that implies an infight between the components of the people. Then we had a multinational army in Lebanon. We had an Italian, a French, and US troops, and they cut off the trees in the south of Lebanon, and there was desertification because of that. So the success of the resistance was very unlikely. So the resistance started as of this, starting with these conditions, and then there were incidents until 1985. I'm not going to list the historic events until February 1985, and that was the first open message or letter that was showing or that was talking to the establishment of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a number of groups, not one group. So when we so this party was a group of parties, and it was a jihadi a jihadi group that practiced politics, but it stayed away from politics at the time. The first strike was a suicide operation by Ahmad al-Qasir, which attacked a military vehicle, and then the operations started to happen. In 1989, the Israeli forces withdrew to Saida and Sur. In 1989, the internal or the civil war, or the 1991, the civil war ended with the invasion of Iraq to Kuwait, and there was a kind of settlement that included having Syria as a custodian of the Lebanese of Lebanon for 15 years. In these 15 years, Hezbollah didn't engage in politics. As it is known, in 1992, the first elections It participated in the elections for the first time, and there was a lot of controversy at the level of the jurisprudence and the Sharia and religious level, whether it is possible to participate in a non-Islamic government or not. There was a lot of controversy, but let me go back a little bit in history. What is the aspects of the elements of Hezbollah in the Lebanese entity or the Lebanese history? As the position from Lebanon, of course, Lebanon is a state that was established in 1920 by a French decision, and the constitution, the Lebanese constitution, was established by a law firm, a French law firm, and this gives, of course, or raise the question of legitimacy of the constitution, because it wasn't put to referendum by the people, and it was set by the French. And the Great Lebanon included some of the preferences to the center in order to support Beirut by the agriculture and other resources. The environment in which Hezbollah was established, it was up to there were a lot of ups and downs in these in that period. And of course, at the hands of Ahmad Basha Shazar 100 years ago, there was a lot of massacres and the blows to this area. So that is the historic context. The position towards the Palestinian cause by the Shia in Lebanon and the Muslims in general, it was expressed early on by Mr. Muhammad Hussein, who gave the money to the revolution before before the Nakba or the catastrophe in several years. Since that time, there was a story that is not told a lot about the suffering of the bordering areas and the people who are later called the people of the south and al-Biqa, but because of the occupation. For several years, there were aggression, and it wasn't mentioned in the media. And there was an old man who told me, who was living in these of bordering villages. Since that time, they were Lebanese, and they were unable to get to the borders, and the Lebanese army was preventing them from getting to the borders in order not to trouble the Israeli forces. This historic context is very important to understand what's happened later. Later on, the Palestinian resistance at some level started to do by Musa al-Sadr and other scholars who participated in the providing the ideological background for that. And in 1972 and then in 1982, there were several aggressions that happened. So this heritage of deprivation and aggression, we started to see in the 1980s, we started to see the term of the disproportionate people and later the vulnerable people. These two terms were widely spread. So this oppression had the background of establishing Hezbollah. Of course, the name itself is coming from the Holy Quran, and the name took time to formulate. There were a lot of suggestions. The name wasn't decided yet, but there were some suggestions before 1982 until the name was finally took shape. And this is a name that it gives the idea of this Muslim party that has the Quran as its background, and the resistance, martyrdom, and struggle and jihad is based on the Islamic background. This brings us to the political jurisprudence, and this is something that I teach. So at the level of the political jurisprudence, amongst the Sunnis and the Shia, there are a lot of points and ideas. Mr. Mohsen Galivar had 9 theories in the political theory or political jurisprudence. One of them is the Wilayat al-Faqih, or the scholar final resolution. At the a level of thought, it is an achievement. We can see that a lot of the Arab elites don't understand Wilayat
It
al-Faqih.
is noted that this term is not widely understood even in Muslim circles. Actually, the first martyr, Muhammad bin Makki al-Jazini, centuries ago, tried to establish this Wilayat al-Faqih to give authority to a jurisprudent person or who knows both Islamic thought and Sharia, and it is even familiar in Western thought in one way or another. Objectively, those are the convictions upon which this school of thought is based, and it continued for some time up till the 90s, where they had a passive contribution or participation in political life until the 1997 or 1998, where they participated in municipal elections. The relation to Lebanon was problematic. So the idea, for example, the Islamic nationhood and the sense of ummah, that they would not abide by the Sykes and Biko lines and borders. This was a debate that existed across Islamic movements, actually. So there was a position in the 80s in the literature. We find a rejection of this idea of the very existence of a nation called Lebanon or a country called Lebanon. But I remember that there was a decision at some point to hold up the Lebanese flags in the offices of the of Hezbollah until in 2000 in Bint Jbeil, where they in the background of the pistol they had the or the podium, sorry, they had the Lebanese flag. This was an evolution in the their sense of nation, and but in 2005, a completely new era started with the assassination of late Prime Minister al-Hariri, and what followed in terms of internal affairs in Lebanon, in addition to regional explosion, so to speak, unfortunately, which led to sectarian strife. And we reached to a new phase of provocation and incitement, which called for Hezbollah to get into the government through ministers from this party. And this was a change and a problematic issue for Hezbollah, because their contribution to power is not something they had in mind originally. And then over 33 days of war, a small group of people was able to overcome the Israeli invasion. And this reminds me again of a quote in the war between a weak and a strong side. The weak triumphs if the strong does not prevail. And afterwards, the Lebanon has been living in peace in terms of from its southern border. This, as I said, was an important background. But then if we talk about the priorities, as I said at the beginning of the establishment of Hezbollah, the priority was resistance, and resistance was not an easy issue, particularly that we have disproportional power and force, because as the Israeli army is magnificent in It's an enormous in its capacities, and war requires a lot of capacities, a lot of hardware and capabilities, and also actually the Israeli army is one of the strongest worldwide. So this idea of resistance was predominant in the thought of Hezbollah at the time, and everything else was put aside. But there was a question put forward every now and then, which is the network of social services offered by Hezbollah. Yes, those institutions were, and this network was established for a main reason. First of all, based on individual initiatives, which were later adopted and embraced by Hezbollah, and some were as parallel or an auxiliary auxiliary institutions to the resistance movement, which is to support the families of the martyrs or the wounded, etc. So yes, we have this network of schools, hospitals, etc., and it was gradual. And this idea of working and providing services to the people was present because it was also based on Sharia. The General Secretary of Hezbollah said at some point, and it is important to note this in terms of the shift that happened in Hezbollah, that we are no longer a jihadi resistance movement only, but we are also one that cares for its community and provides services for its community. And this is important. When we talk about priorities, we're not talking about one priority. Priorities is a plural, not a singular. So if we are to say that resistance is the first priority, that it takes 70-80% of the resources, the second priority would take another part or a lesser percentage of the resources. Hezbollah's bloc in the parliament, called the Loyalty to Resistance bloc, to symbolize their priority being resistance in 2009. And in my book, I mentioned this, and I compared, I undertook a detailed comparison between the charter or the document in 1985 and in 2009. We will find that the essence was the same, but there is a change in the discourse. There was a change in the attitude and talking about Lebanon as a country where diversity is a virtue or an advantage. I have to point out that I'm not associated with or affiliated with any of those parties, but this movement of resistance was its resistance character was predominant for a long time, but then we had this involvement in the parliament and in the ministries, particularly after 2005. So we had those involvements, and I have to point out something that is often disregarded, which is the change in the community itself, the society's change. And if we look at the Shia community, which is the constituency of Hezbollah, they have changed a lot. For example, in the 20th century, they had a poor share of education, very poor actually. It's quite shocking if you look at the numbers. They are now highly educated from a community that is impoverished, more or less, except for the elite. It is now more affluent, and from a community where they lack basic services to a community that enjoys those services. Most importantly, there is a change of mentality. So what the people expected from Hezbollah in 1982 is different from what they expected from it in the 90s, and it's different from what they expect from it now. And this is normal and expected from all movements. Actually, all movements have to observe those changes and sociological shifts that happen in their communities and constituencies, because if they diverge from this, they will be disconnected from reality and from the reality of their communities. And this is something that many movements suffer, be it Islamic movements or otherwise. It is important to point this and be able to follow up on the developments in your own community. The point and the question posed now is, how can Hezbollah do both, give priority to resistance and also work in service provision and community service? We noticed that in the past few years, with the economic crisis that we have, I believe we have seen a good model of this dual function. Before that, we had a sort of a vertical distribution of tasks. So Hezbollah would be responsible for the resistance, while the government would be responsible for the economy and service provision. However, this division or distribution is no longer present. How internal policies always require concessions and compromises. They sometimes require alliances with people who might be a bit suspicious because of a higher cause or a higher interest, because resistance needs a bloc that is diverse from all sects and categories to support its cause. This poses questions which are on the table, and we're talking now on the eve of parliamentary elections in Lebanon, in which many mobilized tools are quite vain and trivial, but the essential questions are missing. The other question is the external factor. It is clear that Hezbollah's funding, I'm aware of the time, I have 1 or 2 minutes to finish. Of course, there is this debate about the Iranian funding and support of Hezbollah. The Iranians are actually ready to support anybody that supports its projects against Israel. This is a reality. The problem is the hostility against Iran and the mix between the sectarian and political dimensions in our nexus with interaction with Iran. Unfortunately, in the Arab world, we lack appropriate knowledge of the situation or the reality of Iran. And it is said that in Lebanon, this small country, we have 28 intelligence agencies, international intelligence agencies active there, and we read many documents and claims about this. But how has Hezbollah been able to maintain its Lebanese character and identity despite its Iranian support? I believe the answer is yes, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions. Actually, at some point there was a severance of relations with Iran because of those external relations between Lebanon and Iran. However, this support continues, and public opinion in Lebanon is divided on this question, and the elections would resolve this issue, hopefully. To conclude, Hezbollah has been able to maintain its focus on its main priority, which is resistance, and was able to establish certain accomplishments which any fair person would recognize, and it has also started its civil and service provision role. And it was quite challenging in the presence of other categories and sects that do not necessarily agree with you, and in a volatile and precarious regional context. I believe, to conclude, it's quite fair to say that Hezbollah's experience is an exceptional one, not only in Lebanon, but across the region. I know I've been very reductive in the way I presented those ideas, but I wanted to respect the time frame given to me and give the opportunity for my other colleagues. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا لك دكتور علي على ما تفضلت.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for
التزامك للوقت الحقيقة عرض ثري.
for your presentation and for abiding by the time limit. I would try to summarize your presentation. He said that he's going to present some ideas about the point given to the topic given to him, which is about Hezbollah, and he started with defining what Hezbollah is, and he used the definition used by Hezbollah itself. It's a jihadi group involved in politics and or that exercises politics. And he mentioned that there is Clausewitz, one of the political scientists, or Michel Foucault, who also said that politics is war by other means. The first emergence of Hezbollah was in 1982. It was the point of departure with the Israeli invasion on the 6th of June to 19. In the 80s, with the invasion and occupation of Beirut, and the first tank that came, that went from Naqoura saw its way through to Beirut, and it was those conditions that, which were tantamount to occupation, full occupation of Lebanon, were very hard after the Palestinian resistance moved from Lebanon to Tunisia. The scene seemed to be quite dramatic as a complete defeat, and the question was, would there be a new operation of liberation? He mentioned that there was a plane before the invasion that moved away with Islamic figures that went to Tehran to a conference on the Iranian-Iraqi war at the time. And this visit was quite essential and important because it is in that meeting that the decision to liberate and resist was taken. It was a fierce resistance, such as in Shaqib and the south, but at the end of the day, the upper hand was for the stronger. So the scene was quite bleak, and especially with the advent of Amin Jmiyel. And then we had the multinational forces that tried to put the situation under control. So the options for resistance were quite hard, but with the emergence of the movements that later contributed to the establishment of Hezbollah, they were not a single group, but a number of groups. They agreed on being resistance movements exercising politics. The first phase was between 1982 to 1985, when they killed the military leader in Sur, and then they started those operations. And in another phase, after the end of civil war in Lebanon with the Ta'if Accord in 1990, there was a compromise by which Syria became the main sponsor of this country, but with an arrangement, also an international arrangement for Saddam to go to Kuwait. For 15 years of Syrian control, Hezbollah did not engage in politics until 2005. The question about the relation between Hezbollah and the state and the constitution, there was a lot of debate, particularly given the Shia community and environment in which Hezbollah came, from which Hezbollah came, which is historically marginalized for more than 200 years and vulnerable, but also within this community, the work for Palestine was an important backbone since the 1930s, and he gave examples about this, and also because they were in the border areas with Palestine, they suffered a lot. So also because of all the suffering of the Shia sect in the south, which reached its peak in 1982. This memory and this history was an important contribution to the emergence of Hezbollah. As for the identity of Hezbollah, it is an Islamic movement, but it's mainly a resistance movement. So the idea of jihad and resistance is an essential part of its identity, and their political jurisprudence is important because the theory of Wilayat al-Faqih was important for Hezbollah, although it was attributed with Iran, but actually it goes way back. It was first attempted in Lebanon itself, but it disappeared later. So he also defined Wilayat al-Faqih as one of the theories in Shia political jurisprudence. It's continued in the 90s when Hezbollah started to engage in political life indirectly and then directly until but then after 2005 it started with direct contribution and participation in politics, and there was fierce debate about the idea of nationalism or recognition of cities-pico borders. This caused a lot of debate and argument. So the literature of this movement in the 80s refused this idea, and even holding up the Lebanese flag was only resolved in 1997 until the liberation in 2000, when the Lebanese flags were held up after the end of Israeli occupation of the south. There was a golden era between 2000 and 2005 until the late prime minister was assassinated, which after which a sectarian strife broke out that forced Hezbollah to engage in direct political participation, which gave rise to a number of questions, such as the contribution to a non-Islamic rule. And then in 2006 we had the war of 33 days in which the enemy was unable to prevail or to impose its will.
Then he talked about the priorities, and that the priority was that the defeat of the Zionist enemy, and that requires the mobilization of the enemies, and that especially that the enemy is the strongest part on the Western Hemisphere, on the Eastern Hemisphere. Then the party had created a social network which creates grassroots or constituency to the party, because this sect requires a lot of services, especially in the absence of the services of the state. And another problem, the other issue is that these institutions will be supportive of the resistance. And he provided the example of the martyrs and the wounded. And he said that, or he quoted the Secretary General of Hezbollah, that he said, we are no longer a jihadi organization or a faith-based organization, but we are also providing services, and our jurisprudence is about the jurisprudence of the priorities, and that the priority is also to provide services and social services to the people. Then he mentioned the issuance of a document, and he said that it is a very important document, and he compared it with the documents of 1995 and 2009, and that there was a change in the discourse, that there is no rejection of the other, but there is a kind of confronting the enemy through 4 decades, and that the engagement of Hezbollah in politics increased largely after 2005. And he also mentioned an important point, which is the development of the Lebanese community, especially or society, especially the Hezbollah community. And the most important point is that the change in thoughts, ideology, and the mentality within the sect, and not only in Hezbollah, and especially that this is the grassroots of the Hezbollah. And then he raised the question that how can Hezbollah strike a balance between resistance and the social and political activity. He said that in the past years there was a good approach for this issue, and the question is whether this model succeeded in the balance between the defense and the resistance and the provision of services inside Lebanon. But that there is a lot of questions that are raised as we are approaching parliamentarian elections tomorrow. The other question that he raised also the foreign weight, because it is no secret that Hezbollah is funded by Iran, and this raised a lot of controversy inside Lebanon. That especially that Iran is ready to support any party against Israel, but there is a kind of, but there is an aspect that is related to the regional confrontation, and he mentioned that there is 28 foreign intelligence agency that is active in Lebanon, and that Lebanon is not only an area of border conflict, but it is a central conflict or area of conflict between the difficult countries. And he concluded by saying that Hezbollah is a jihadi party or movement that managed to focus on that through genuine achievements, through the resistance, liberating the territories, as well as the civic activity that Hezbollah that is conducting in the country. So this is an extraordinary active experience of an Islamic movement in the Arab region. Now we move to the second paper by Dr. Bilal to present his paper. Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon. Do you hear me?
نعم اسمعك تفضل.
يلا هقول السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
So peace be upon you again.
دكتور سامي الإخوة المحاضرين.
Thank you, Dr. Sami, for the invitation. I'd like to salute the speakers and the attendees. First, I would like to thank SIGA for tackling this very important issue that need to be studied for the future. And I would like to thank Dr. Ali for the background that he provided in the paper that he provided as we are getting into this issue. And because we have plenty of points, and each point that was presented maybe requires hours of research, I would try to be brief and extensive in my presentation, and I will divide my work into four sections. The first one is about the background. The second one based on the experience and the political performance, maybe since the beginning of Hezbollah, which took into consideration those principles. Since the launch, these principles were taken into consideration even before provide the theoretical background or framework. It was taken into consideration in a practice and until reaching the paper that was issued. And finally, I'm going to talk about the performance through the stages, and I'm going to divide the stages into three stages. The first one, since the At-Taif agreement, because maybe before At-Taif there was war and there were disputes by the different parties, and then I'm going to speak about the stage after in the post Rafiq al-Hariri area after 2005, and then the third stage trying to look at the future. As for the introduction, what we need to search intensively and on its own requires to have a symposium on itself. It is true that Hezbollah is a faith-based Islamic jihadi movement, and it represents itself or defines itself to people who are close to it. It defines itself in a religious way, and at the level of terminology it uses the religious terminology, and it takes the aspect of not a religious aspect or a religious party at face value, but no, it goes in the depth of the Islamic principles. The experience of Hezbollah is not only a faith-based and then jihadi movement. No, it takes into the center of its issues the cause of Palestine. And if we want to look at that at a in the large picture, it is a cross-border issue, and at the same time, Hezbollah is a Lebanese party par excellence. So the question becomes, how could Hezbollah, through 40 years, how could it couple these three aspects? Taken, if we suppose that a lot of people say that these aspects might be contradicting. I believe this is what we need to consider and to study thoroughly. Right now, I don't want to take position because we are speaking in academic discourse now, but even the enemies or the adversary of Hezbollah inside Lebanon, who are fierce adversaries, they couldn't find any contradiction through which they could penetrate these three aspects. And we know who are the adversaries inside Lebanon. We're talking about the most fierce adversaries with their allies in the region and in the world. And Hezbollah believes in Wilayat al-Faqih, which means that it has a very specific religious background. It seems that the faith-based movements or the Islamic movements that took the Palestinian cause an umbrella for their activity and the center of their activity, maybe they managed to overcome a lot of obstacles that other Islamic movements in other countries that didn't center their activity around the Palestinian cause. This is something that requires further study, and maybe this is what distinguishes Hezbollah, as I'm going to show in my paper. The second point, it is for those who want to understand Hezbollah more and its political performance, what is obvious is that Hezbollah has a lot of discussion and debate about the political jurisprudence. At face value, some Lebanese believe that we see, or some Lebanese say that it is a secular movement in its discourse. But those who know Hezbollah closely, they can see that there is a lot of discussion at the level of the political jurisprudence. That's why the political jurisprudence within Hezbollah is a very open discussion, just as it is strongly upholding its religious background. And this is something that is not focused on a lot. As you all know, since the beginning, the moment of the formal establishment was when the Israelis invaded Lebanon and got to Abda Palace. This moment was very important because it helps us to understand how Hezbollah thought, and they had three options at the time: either to engage with the American-Israeli projects at the time, just as most of the Arab regimes and parties were involved or engaged, or the other option is to make a kind of settlement and take their position in the authority and make use of the loots that were the loots of war that all other parties shared after the war, or the third option is to resist. And maybe there was a fourth option, which was to resist the tools, which is the authority at the time, which means to get in a conflict with the authority. And some parties were used by the Israelis and the Americans, and some of them were the tools that was perpetrated in Sabra and Shatila, a massacre that attacked the Palestinian camps in Sabra and Shatila. So Hezbollah maybe had the option to have a confrontation or conflict with those with parties that were inclined with the Israeli movement. It was interesting that Hezbollah took the option to not to confront the tools, although they betrayed it, and not to get involved with the structures of the authority, and not to surrender to the Americans, but to get in direct confrontation with the Americans and the Israelis. At that time, maybe it wasn't very. It wasn't clear its identity, but they made several blows to the Americans and the French through suicide attacks that were planned by the structures of Hezbollah, which wasn't very clear at that time. And then they started to do operations confronting the Israelis. So from the four options, they didn't confront the betraying parties inside the authority, and they didn't surrender to the Americans. They took a different option, which was the direct confrontation with the Americans and the Israelis, with all the meaning of that at that time. This, of course, shows a mentality that will help us to get into conclusions and the description of the movement. Maybe in the past period, out of the experience of resistance, which since the beginning there was no consensus, even amongst the Islamic background, to go on with the resistance. But Hezbollah chose that if we were patient and on the resistance, and we continued that work, maybe it will become the terms of reference for the Lebanese society, and maybe later it will become terms of reference of a system in this society in Lebanon and in the Arab countries that can be followed, because in the mentality of Hezbollah, it sees that the Arab and Islamic countries, they lack a system that organizes the society away from the constitution. Hezbollah was working in different fields, so there was no one topic that groups or brings together all the Lebanese. There was problems in the identity of the Lebanese. A long time, the Hezbollah understood that the resistance, it will not only be useful to liberate the lands or the territory from the invasion or from the enemy, but that we lack the any value-based authority in our systems, and if we depend on that, that will help us do that in our societies, and that was proven at a later stage. The third point, that even that also within all of that course of action of Hezbollah, it was interesting that Hezbollah, maybe there was in the past 40 years, there was some point, maybe after the assassination of Al-Hariri, all of, but all in the past 40 years, all the alliances between Hezbollah and its allies was Palestine, which means that uh, the center of activity of Hezbollah was Palestine, and that didn't put Hezbollah in confrontation with any powers. Here, of course, I am describing what the realities on the ground. This is not wishful thinking. This is the description of what's happened in the past years. If there is anything amongst the speakers who believe that the opposite is correct, so you can be my guest and point out those points later. When the Mavi Marmara ship wanted to break the siege on Gaza, the constituency of Hezbollah in the south, they were in demonstrations in the streets, raising the Turkish flags and the pictures of Recep Tayyip Erdogan for in support of this movement to break the siege on Gaza. So what I want to say is that the movements or the center of activity for Hezbollah was always Palestine, and in addition to the sovereignty of Lebanon all the time, that there is no disengagement between the sovereignty of Lebanon and fighting the Israeli Zionist enemy. Number four, in the course of Hezbollah, apart from the 5th of June of May or the 7th of May, was an extraordinary point, and we can talk about that in a specific. But this Hezbollah, since the establishment up till now, Hezbollah didn't confront the authority in Lebanon, but rather managed to have a political theory that it considered a necessity that we want to have. And this theory was under the title People, Army, Resistance. And maybe it requires a separate meeting in order to present this theory and how we need it in a transitional period. The most important thing with this theory is that it didn't confront the security forces in in Lebanon, and which is similar to the Arab countries, and it avoided any differences or any conflict with the authority, especially that Lebanon was completely prone to changes, and that in Lebanon it is very well known that the American ambassador might call and order some parties to do this or that, and this is something that is well known in Lebanon. So Hezbollah managed to do that through a set of values that it believes in. But the point of the 5th of May or the 7th of May, it's an extraordinary point that we can talk about later. I believe that the book or the theory, although important, it can only be complemented through experience. And the theory of the Shia political jurisprudence through the past year didn't have the some people might call it the Safavid experience, and in the points of view of Hezbollah, they don't believe that the Safavid experience is a Shia experience. Today, Hezbollah believes that the Iranian experience is an experience of a Shia sect in governance, but this is an experience in authority or in power. Anyway, in the Shia political jurisprudence maybe have a lot of writings about it in the books, but trying that or experimenting that on the ground is more important in order to see how the performance or the putting theory into practice can work, which means that we also saw that since the beginning there were three issues that were constants in the political discourse of Hezbollah. The first one is the elimination of the the elimination of the entity. The second point is redefining the conflict from a conflict within the components of the society into a political conflict. It is very important that in Lebanon, the conflict in Lebanon was moved from a Muslim Christian conflict where into a political conflict between those who are inclined with the Israelis and those who are against the Israelis. And the third point, in addition to the confrontation with Israel, the political battle, the sovereign battle, which means that Lebanon is not similar to Iran, nor to the United States, nor France, nor Saudi Arabia, nor Syria. So it provides this kind of mentality, and we can see that constant in all of the course of the action of Hezbollah. Maybe in the beginning of the 80s, Hezbollah wasn't an organized party, but from 1985 onward, there was no contradiction in this approach. Maybe there was maturity and not contradiction, as Mr. Fadlallah said. And here I want to mention, because it is a very important to mention. But maybe for reasons that has to do with the grievances and oppression, that the Shia sect and a lot of Sunnis were suffering, and we have a lot of Sunnis in the north and the Shia of Biqa and the Shia of the south. They were not aware of the Lebanese state since the Turkish presence in Lebanon. So the Sunni and Shia, they consider themselves outside the state, and a large part of the Lebanese people consider themselves that they don't have a state that is taking interest in their welfare. So Hezbollah didn't see in the beginning of the 80s, when it wasn't organized yet, its constituency didn't see the state or the Lebanese flag that represented. But what was interesting, that who incited and raised awareness of this party about the importance of the Lebanese flag and the entity of the Lebanese state was Wilayat al-Faqih. And this also, if you want, we can have a separate session on this issue. And there is a joke that Mr. Hassan Nasrallah says about this issue, that those who talked and raised awareness about the flag, that's how you don't put the flag of Lebanon behind you, and you are Lebanese, and of course you are from Lebanon, and even if your grassroots or your constituency feel sorry about the Lebanese situation, but who raised awareness about using the Lebanese flag was Wilayat al-Faqih. So this is something that needs to further discussion. In addition to that, Hezbollah was very careful from getting into the Lebanese game,
Hezbollah was very cautious
the game of the state,
engaging in the so-called state game of the state. That's why, except for the past 10 years, Hezbollah avoided engagement within the state, not only because of convictional and essential questions, but because mainly it wanted to maintain the purity of its banner of resistance and did not want to restrain itself politically by engaging within the state, because the state was entangled between Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the United States, and it would be restrained in its movement, and it was so determined to free itself from any restraints by any state, and it has paid very dearly for this decision to be so independent. So it was very cautious in engaging in the state, let alone the fact that Lebanon was called a state, but it wasn't a nation state, wasn't like all Arab states, basically. So when we use the word state, constitution, law, it requires the reproduction of a new reality. But in the viewpoint of Hezbollah, this needs to be reproduced not from top down, but from the bottom up. And that's why they tried to work on the grassroots up to the power. And that's why it based its standing on community rather than authority. And this is reflected in all of its practices. And I don't believe that Hezbollah can be said to have digressed from those principles at any point. You have only 4 minutes. Oh, unfortunately, I've forgotten all about the time. Let me, in the last point, say that Hezbollah started to view or to think that it was not reasonable to be in confrontation by all enemies on all levels, by all strategies. And at the end, the enemy would tell us, stay in the south, and I would come to you from any and all directions, geopolitically, geographically, and on other levels. And I believe that that's why Hezbollah started to work on a new level, which is not a divergence from its principles, but it is an adaptation to the new dynamics of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Israel is using and employing the resources cross-border. It's using resources in even Arab countries. It's using U.S. support, and that's why Hezbollah started to support resistance movements in the region at large, particularly in Palestine, giving itself an advantage and a margin of an edge on its enemies at all levels. To move to the political level, the Ta'if Accord was based on representation in the parliament rather than engagement within the executive branch, and we continued and persisted in this way since the presence of the Saudi Arabia and Syria created stability for some time, until there was that earthquake that shaked Lebanon in 2005 with the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri, and then the exit of Syria from Lebanon by international resolution, and then in 2006 the June war. All of those were within one package and one strategy to hit and give a blow to the resistance, so much so that Hezbollah was forced to engage in the political authority and political arena to avoid being dwarfed by governments such as that of Fuad al-Sanyura, who received U.S. officials saying that they wanted to introduce a new Middle East after the June war. And then on the 7th of May, Hezbollah started to engage in politics to avoid confrontation with the army. So in 2005, it engaged in politics in order to maintain resistance, not only through the parliament, but also in the ministries, in order to maintain resistance. And their political presence was mainly on the defensive until the U.S. approach to Hezbollah was changed with its regional allies and internal allies. And this approach was changed after 2015 when the enemy used a socio-economic siege in order to cause an upheaval by the constituency against Hezbollah, and it started to witness a crisis that is unprecedented over 100 years. And this was deepened, particularly that when Hezbollah and its allies were able to take a parliamentary majority in 2018, so much so that the U.S. considered that the identity of Lebanon shifted from a francophone state 100 years ago to a resistance state now, which caused this use of economic tools, siege, and corrupt politicians in order to crush the resistance. It is then that the Hezbollah started to take steps in order to making use of the resistance in regional states, and they would not, those resistance movements have taken the model of Hezbollah and are no longer concerned about engagement in politics, and while maintaining their resistance character. And also they found out that not engaging with the state or in the state would be a failure for resistance itself, making Hezbollah use a new approach in its engagement. And now that we are on the eve of elections, Hezbollah, for the first time, declares that it is able to work in parallel on both levels, the resistance and the advocacy of Palestine, and also to engage internally in service provision and economic support. This is a major shift in the performance of Hezbollah. I tried to intensify and speak condensely about those ideas, and I hope that if we are meant to meet and we visit your university in Islamic Turkey, we would be able to discuss this even in more detail. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Bilal, for this outstanding presentation. In his introduction, he said he was going to speak on 3 levels. So the first was an introduction. Second was to look at certain parameters to evaluate the political experience of Hezbollah, and then to evaluate a performance over the 3 phases of its presence. He said Hezbollah was a faith-based jihadi Islamic movement, and it used the Islamic doctrines and Islamic principles based on their conviction in those principles. It wasn't only a theoretical standing, but it was their understanding and their relation to Palestine as a pivotal point of a pivotal essence for their presence over decades. At the same time, it's a par excellence Lebanese party. And the question was, how was this party able to reconcile those 3 levels, which is the Islamic character, Palestine as a priority, and its Lebanese identity, given that it came to being within a complicated Lebanese context. Even the adversaries of Hezbollah within Lebanon were unable to find fault in its coordination between these 3 levels. Undoubtedly, it believes in Wilayat al-Faqih, and this is no secret. And the most important manifestation of this is that its commitment to Palestine is pivotal to its existence, and Hezbollah has many contributions to political work. Some even accused it of being secular or pragmatic in its political work, but it is profound and open at the same time in the Lebanese arena. Then Dr. Bilal talked about the principles or the main levels in which the Hezbollah operates, or the strategies, so to speak. He said the beginning was in its decision that Hezbollah at the beginning had four options. The first was, when we're talking here about the time after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, it had a number of options. First of all, to engage in the Zionist American projects like other movements in Lebanon or parties. The other was to compromise or to establish a truce and to take part of the authority. And the third was to use to resist the Israelis, and the fourth was indirect resistance using against the proxies or the tools of Israel or of the US in their conflict on authority, which are the colonization tools, i.e. resistance by indirect means. The option made or taken by Hezbollah was direct resistance to the invasion, and it was this decision that was outstanding for Hezbollah throughout its history, through its this main strategy, which is direct confrontation or resistance with the Israelis and Western enemies through fighting and martyrdom. The second strategy or basis for Hezbollah was that there was no consensus even within Hezbollah on the idea of resistance, but the leadership insisted that it is resistance that may offer a model at the level of the Islamic nation. But there was ideological fragmentation. With the passage of time, it was overcome, and Hezbollah was able to establish that our communities and our nations required a model. And the third was that all the levels and all the topics or all the parameters used by Hezbollah in its strategies and operations, it always used the question of Palestine as the point of reference. And the example was the move of Marmara ship in 2010, and that the stance of Hezbollah was quite outstanding. Even the use of Turkish flags and a very positive attitude to that. And they also continued their fight against the Israeli occupation. But then, while it used to use all of its resources for Palestine without confrontation with the army or with security forces, its movements were based on positive networking with those security agencies or army, although they were in good relations with other parties that were not consistent with Hezbollah. But the fifth point was that for Hezbollah, it was the practical experience that makes it outstanding rather than purely theoretical standings. And that's why in its political discourse, it was based on that occupation and Israel was finite, and then that the conflict was not sectarian, but rather political, based on an identity, a national identity, and a conflict with Israeli. And this made many outside the Shia sect, including even Christians, support this discourse. And they also used a discourse of resistance, which was not only important for the Shia, but also for the marginalized Sunnis in the north. And they also, by talking about the finite character of Israel. This was by direct instruction from Wali al-Faqih. Then he said that Hezbollah was quite cautious in its engagement with the state, particularly in the first 3 decades, not only from an ideological point of view, but in order to maintain its resistance character and in order not to engage within the political friction, and it was based on a community-based movement rather than a state-based movement. And then it thought that it was unreasonable for the party to wait for its enemy to besiege it in this southern suburb of Beirut, but it had to move elsewhere to confront the enemy on other margins and other levels in this conflict that is not only Lebanese but regional. At the end, he said that there was a phase in the 90s which ended in the Taif Accord, and then the second ended in the Rafiq al-Hariri and assassination and the blow against the resistance, and that was followed by the decision to engage in politics, which is in reaction to this blow to the resistance, and that their engagement was to overcome this targeting of the resistance after the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri and the 2006 war. And all of those movements were within the framework of maintaining and preserving the resistance and to protect and fend against local enemies. And then we moved to the new phase in which economic tools were mobilized against the resistance in order to mobilize or to cause upheaval amongst the ranks of the grassroots against the constituency of Hezbollah. So this direct political engagement was necessary in order to overcome those blows and this targeting. And at the end of the day, Palestine resistance and the fight against Israel was pivotal in its existence, and that its political engagement was only made necessary as a reaction to this targeting. Thank you so much, Dr. Bilal. Our next speaker, please go ahead, Dr. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Mahmoud Haider. I would like to thank SIGA and Dr. Sami Al-Arian for organizing this symposium, and I would like to thank all the participants in this session, Dr. Ali Fadlallah, Dr. Bilal Laqis, and Dr. Al-Hulayli from Egypt. Actually, the title used for this symposium in international relations requires by itself a clarification of what it means within the presentation that I am about to start.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please. We can hear you. First of all, I would like to point out a methodological issue in terms of discussion of issues related to Hezbollah as an exceptional phenomenon within the context of national liberation movements, which were predominant over the past century and some of which survive to date. This exception, which Hezbollah's experience entails, requires much in-depth consideration away from media or day-to-day ideas confrontation, which blurs the idea of looking at this experience in depth without looking at a reality-based and the determinants of this experience over 40 years. Even a realistic judgment or evaluation of a 40-year-old experience may be undue today or not easy today because the experience is not complete, although the components of this experience are principles that are held by the owners of this experience. However, this geostrategic dimension of this experience is not complete to date, and this is what we are discussing I will be discussing in my paper. So I tried to title my paper, which is the Geo Strategy of Resistance. And when I talk about resistance, I'm talking about Hezbollah, which is the regulator, so to speak, of resistance, its ideology, and the main essential player in identifying its tactical and strategic orientation. When I talk about geostrategy, this includes what we might call international relations. However, international relations are, as we know them, involve the involvement or the communication between partners on international levels. And the situation is not so for Hezbollah. The strategic position of resistance or of Hezbollah in Lebanon is a positioning in which we can say that there is international influence, and it cannot be reduced into mere diplomatic relations between Hezbollah and other states or other liberation movements. The meaning of geostrategy mainly is the strategic geography or the territory that is the basis, the foundation of a political action that goes beyond the sphere of the geographic sphere of this policy. And this is what we mean by the geostrategy of Hezbollah. From the beginning, Hezbollah developed, evolved, and expanded and gained capability in a geographic area that is in itself that has a geostrategic bearing, which is the south of Lebanon, adjacent to the Israeli entity, which came to being in 1948. And if we try to read the strategic meaning of the Israeli entity, it is a geostrategic entity that has meanings that are linked to the West. In other words, it is an entity that has come as a result of the Western will, making it the extension of Western colonialism and a fruit of Western colonialism. So what affects this entity affects the Western civilization and its values one way or another.
Away from the daily promotion of the vision to Hezbollah, whether the Iranian issue in Lebanon or away from or extra Lebanese issue. So we need to take into consideration or to ponder into this experience based on the history and the positioning upon which the experiment of Hezbollah is based. This position entails a number of impactful aspects that made historic impacts in the Lebanese issue, especially in the confrontation with the Israeli entity. If we look at when the moment of the establishment of the Israeli entity, and then the occupation of a large percentage of the Arab countries in the 70s. From that moment on, this entity couldn't expand, or it could expand only in a limited way. For example, there are ideologies, or the ideologies that are taking place, they ended since the 60s. And from that moment, we can say that the Israeli geopolitical expansion stopped at that point. And when a movement stopped working or stopped expansion, it means that it is a conditional reflection that this is the moment of decline. In the experience of Hezbollah, or the confrontation between the geostrategy of Hezbollah and the geostrategy of the Israeli entity, there was a kind of breaking a number of constants that were dominant in the region, which were that the strategic victory of Israel ended in the area, especially what happened in 2000, that Israel, for the first time, its army withdrew without any negotiations with the party that contributed to this withdrawal, or caused that withdrawal, and a new journey started by creating a new balance of powers and creating new factors for breaking these dominant rules. At the geopolitical level, and what happened in the 1960s, which made a turning point for the Israeli reality, it wasn't studied well. That turning point was the point that allowed Israel to wage a war, or to control the war, and when to start and when to end the war. This is a very important point, and it is linked with a founding ideological aspect in the Israeli entity, which says that this state can always take the initiative successfully and open the space for changing the balance of powers in the region. This issue stopped after the war of July. A very important factor emerged, which was the strategic deterrence, which means that Israel stopped completely, in my viewpoint, or don't have the ability anymore to control the image, and it requires the a redefinition of the Israeli entity, which was based on the victory in the region. Based on the philosophy of history, we can say that this incident that we should build on, not only on the military and security level, but also at the cultural level, that there is capability lies within the hands of the people of this region to gain victory on the imperialistic expansion based on breaking this entity, and on the ability to open the space on making a new theorization, modern theorization in this region. These experiments that were made by the resistance in the past 40 years are founding experiences that we can build on for coming periods. That's why I said, or I started by saying that this experience is not over yet, because there are two aspects or two phases to them. One of them is a reviving aspect, and there a military aspect that is still going on, and a cultural aspect that brings back the question of of modernity and the revival here. So the action that was created by this movement and by this phenomena by itself creates a lot of historical questions that are related with the concerns of the elites in the region and in the Islamic world in general. That's why we found that this civilized civilizational attack that we see today in the soft war or the soft power against the phenomenon of resistance, which turned into a geopolitical action that is not limited to the area that it was launched from, which is the south of Lebanon, into the close relations with the Palestinian resistance and the close relations with the liberation movements in the entire region. And this is a natural expansion that has nothing to do with anything that is related to the conspiracy theory, but rather a normal development of this strategic development that was created by the resistance movement in Lebanon. There is an important aspect in the geopolitics of resistance, is that it gained the founding principle, modern principle, which limited the imperialist expansion in the region, and it is related to the renaissance, so to say, at the level of the region. And there was a question since the beginning of the last century until today, which is how the West developed and why the Muslims were on the drawback. This question didn't take into consideration that making a founding incident or event that can be created upon which this question can be built. The issue is about the capability. It is related to the ability of making a genuine tip of the balance of powers with the historic adversary. When this tipping of balance on the ground is implemented, which is a tipping of balance in the capability on the ground, it creates a space for new questions that are related to the culture and the question of development and backwardness. And some of the answers that were made amongst the elites in the entire century, they were in theory and they were away from the reality. And the judgment was based on the value and not on the realities. Today, we have a new reality that provided us with fertile grounds to extract from it the rules of the reality. This happened through the confrontation between the Israeli entity and the resistance. This gave this fertile ground to create new questions that has to do with the liberation of this ummah and this region, as well as liberating the mindset of the people of this region. Unfortunately, all the confront all the theories that talked about Hezbollah, although they were talking about the tactical aspect, they didn't tackle this aspect in specific, which opens a new space of thinking related to the strategic enemy, whether the settlement adversary in Palestine or the Western adversary with its hegemony that is practiced in the entirety of the region. So we are in a historic turn point, a new historic turn point that we need to consider from the perspective of the philosophy of history, because indeed we are in a founding period, and this this founding period starts from a ground that has the founding principles or the elements of a foundation, regardless whether Hezbollah is aware of all of these consequences or not. What is important is that the facts that are present now is that we have a space that we can build on. I believe that the basic issue that was created by these realities goes back to the restoring the optimism in the ability of creating a modern and civilized renaissance in the area. This understanding is overcoming the mentality of defeat that we had in the region. Those defeats that started since the collapse of the Ottoman Sultanate in the past century, up till the defeats that were experienced by the different countries of the Muslim and Arab worlds, up till today, that where we witness a change in the dominant image. I believe that such pessimism diminished and is replaced by a historic optimism that can answer the majority of the questions that concerned most of the elites in our Arab and Muslim world, whether they are related to create a new renaissance that can restore to this ummah its glory once again. The deep and the strategic elements of this optimism is that we need to see Palestine in the hands of its own people, and this is not based on the judgment of values, but it is based on the reality that is very crystal clear, and the experience of the Palestinian resistance in the recent years proved that there is a new phase that started at the level of confrontation inside Palestine, which shows that there is ability to liberate Palestine, and it's not a matter of steadfastness in the face of the repeated Israeli aggressions. So we are facing a new history where the resistance, or what we can call today the axis of Jerusalem or the axis of Al-Quds, represents the leading or the spearhead force of the change that will be witnessed in this area in the coming foreseeable future. Another point is related to the geopolitical understanding of the resistance. speaking about the culture and the ideology of the resistance, or the metaphysics of the resistance, is that it relied on, since the beginning, they didn't rely on the balance of powers, but rather on the spirit of capability and being able to make victories. And this we can call the meta-strategic aspect, which means that the presence of the belief that created the first elements of victory within the resistance. And this meta-strategic element got into the Lebanese resistance is a matter that wasn't studied in looking at the liberation or studying the liberation that a lot of the think tanks in the West didn't look into, and they were showing surprise, or at least questioning, without finding any answers, asking how can a small force that is limited in equipment, weapons, and manpower to make such a victory that is unexpected against a power that is sponsored and supported by most of the Western powers. So this meta strategy or meta element is found inside Palestine as well, which means that we have this element that accumulates a lot of morale that provides a lot of sacrifices, and at the same time they are capable of terrorizing the enemy, and we are seeing that inside occupied Palestine and in Gaza. So this meta-strategic element that founded the resistance in Lebanon and that created the beginnings of the resistance, regardless of the ideological slogans. This spiritual element is the core of this meta-strategic or geostrategic element that was experienced by the resistance inside Lebanon. And everything that is said about the weapon of the resistance, all of this discourse is proving a failed discourse, because those who are talking about or using such a discourse, they are not looking at the balance of powers today in the region, or about the ability of the resistance to make any concession about this strategic element, which is the weapon of the resistance. So what we can seek in this space of thinking about the experience of the resistance is to open a space for pondering and academic discussion to analyze this experience away from the propaganda used in the media that is a mere extension of what is the American and the Western administration is using, because of the failure of Israel in the area and the inability of eliminating the resistance in Lebanon. So they are relying now on the soft power that is related to the American theory of creative chaos that continues to until today. And we have seen how what the so-called Arab Spring is something that is linked to this strategy through which there is an attempt to dismantle the forces that emerged in this region, which will pave the way to reformulate those forces in line with the American interests. The slogan of Al-Quds access is not only a slogan or a theoretical slogan, it is a genuine one par excellence, and it has two aspects. One of them is strategic and the other one is a religious and spiritual one, because the meaning of Jerusalem for the Muslims and Christians of the world, it is the moral grounds upon which all the free people of the world can be mobilized, and all people who have in their hearts conscious, even in the West, can mobilize, because they can see that the only entity in this world that is still based on settlements and replacing people with other people is the Israeli occupation. So now there are questions and discussions that are taking place in in so many think tanks in the world. I will stop here with this general overview about the idea of the geostrategic expansion, its meaning, and indicators for the Lebanese resistance. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmoud, for this distinguished addition. In the beginning, he said that he wants to speak about methodological point about Hezbollah in the past century. He said that this extraordinary experience requires to ponder this experience in depth, away from the directed media propaganda. And he said that in the past 4 decades is difficult to understand this issue, and even if there is a kind of political event that is happening, but the geopolitical or geostrategic point is not over yet, or it's not completed yet. The title of his paper, The Geostrategic Vision of Hezbollah. He said that the international relations might talk about a local component, but he's not going to talk about this axis, but he's talking about the strategic positioning of the party and how it can impact the international position, and it is not limited to the local or international relations. The geostrategy is the capability of the territory that is not that is relentless in its activity, and that in the south, where there are direct borders with the Zionist entity. That's why we need to read the meaning, the strategic meaning of the entity, and it has links with the West. And this project is a continuation of the Western civilization, which means that this entity is influenced and is influenced by the West, which means about the theory of modernization and the modern understanding. So we want to we should put ourselves away from describing Hezbollah as an expansion of Iran, and we need to read this experience from a strategic and geostrategic point of view. We need to understand, or there are aspects that allow us to understand this issue, because this entity was established in 1948, and it was until it was stabilized, and then it came into its peak in a geostrategic area in 1967, after after occupying Sinai and the remaining of Palestine. But afterwards, this entity couldn't expand more as the founders wanted it to be. So this geostrategic expansion at the level, at the physical expansion stopped. The geostrategic confrontation of Hezbollah with the geostrategy of Israel, it showed, or it broke a number of constants, and these were the constants that ruled the area for several decades. First, that the strategy, we lost the speaker.
أي أن هذه كانت مرحلة جديدة.
It showed that this was a new phase that led to into new realities, and the war of 2006 couldn't change that, but it rather was a turning point in the conflict, which meant that the Israel cannot control the results of the war, and that was linked largely to the geostrategy, and that the entity in the past used to take the initiative in order to start or end the conflict, but that stopped. Afterwards, another rule or another principle took place, which was the strategic deterrence, which was the inability of making any activity to change the image and to restore the image of the Israeli entity. This is important, not only at the physical aspect, but also at the psychological and moral aspect. This allowed to have a new space for a new renaissance of the region. This is important because this a founding experience that future periods can be built on. That's why he said that this experience is not completed yet, and that it will have direct influence on the renaissance and the revival of this region through the action that was produced by this experience, which means that this experience showed an example that can answer a lot of questions that are asked by the Arab elites about the future of the region, and that can explain the attack, the fierce attack against the resistance forces and the movement in the region. This is a normal development in the geostrategy for the resistance movement, and this is also a normal development in the face of the imperialist and Zionist expansion in the area, and it puts the Muslims and Arabs face to face with their enemies or their adversary, and it has to do with the capability and ability, which means that these issues led to raise the questions that has to do with the culture and the question of the improvement or development and backwardness, and this came through the conflict with the Zionist enemy to liberate the awareness of the people. This also rebuilds new horizons in thinking and the confrontation, the direct confrontation with the Israelis, or with the indirect confrontation with the Western and American hegemony in the area. So we are in the period of founding or foundation, in which there were elements that we can build on, regardless whether Hezbollah was aware of that or not. The core issue is restoring the point of the historic optimism to stop the imperialist movement that started in the last century, and that was in its peak in the last century. And since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, this feeling or the sentiment has changed, and now we can find a lot of answers for the issue of development or renaissance in the area. And we can see that firsthand in Palestine, to see Palestine in the hands of its people and to liberate Palestine directly. We are in a new chapter of history that was created by the axis of Al-Quds, or the axis of Jerusalem, and the axis of resistance that will build a new reality in the near future. This also has to do with the geopolitics of the resistance, which didn't rely on the realities, but it relied on the meta strategy, or which is the spiritual and the faith belief that that is in the conflict, and this is something that was not studied or approached by the think tanks in the West or in think tanks in the Arab world. But this can be understood at the level of the civilized Islamic culture. This meta-strategic aspect is found in the resistance in Palestine, and we can see that there is a huge amount of the aware moral capability that is incurring defeats amongst the Israelis. This is the core of the geostrategy, and that was experimented by the resistance in Lebanon. Talking about removing the weapon of the resistance, those people who use this discourse, they know that or they need to understand that the things that cannot happen, and the history will not be repeated here. What we need to understand is that away from the political propaganda, after the adversary wanted to, they failed to eliminate the resistance. Now they are creating a new reality through the creative anarchy or a creative chaos in order using the soft power to end this resistance. The slogan of Al-Quds is a spiritual and religious slogan, and it is a practice on the ground, and it can mobilize Christians and Muslims, and it can mobilize also the free people of the world for those who still have a living conscience in order to eliminate this settlement ideology in Palestine that is replacing a people by other people. Thank you all speakers, Mr. Ali, Mr. Bilal, Mr. Mahmoud. Thank you very much for your papers, and now we are going to move to Dr. Al-Hudayli, who is going to provide a comment on these papers for 15 minutes, and then we will allow the attendees here and the participants on any virtual platform to have any comments or question, and we will finish within we're going to finish at 2 our time in Istanbul. Also, it is 2 in Lebanon, in the time of Lebanon, then we will have a break. Now, Dr. Al-Hudayli, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sami, for giving me this opportunity. I also...
الصوت موجود. لا نسمع. هل أنت على القناة العربية؟
Are you speaking on the Arabic channel?
لحظة. ألو.
Hello.
ألو. السلام عليكم.
نحن عم نسمعك.
Peace be upon you. Actually, we can hear you. Can you go to the Arabic channel?
أنا أسمعك.
تسمعني؟
أسمعك.
نحن لا نسمعك. تحتاج تذهب إلى القناة العربية وميوت
original audio. You have to go to the Arabic channel and mute the original audio, please.
دكتور سامي نحن عم نسمع.
تسمعني الآن؟
نحن عم نسمع.
أوكي. يمكن نحن لا نسمعك. لحظة واحدة دكتور. لحظة. يونس.
تسمعونني الآن؟
Can you hear me now?
Interpreters can hear him. We cannot. From here. لحظة واحدة دكتور معنا.
Can you please hold on for a second? Dr. Sami can't hear the speaker.
الآن مسموع.
Can you hear me now?
السلام عليكم.
Hello. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
سلام. شكرا. الدكتور سامي لا يسمعني.
Dr. Sami can't hear me.
Hello?
How do I do my computer? It is on. طيب دكتور تسمعني؟
أسمعك.
Can you hear me? Yes.
I can't hear him. تفضل.
Please go ahead.
نعم أسمعك. تفضل. تفضل سيدي.
الحمد لله. شكرا دكتور سامي على إتاحة هذه
Thank you, Dr. Sami, for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to thank your distinguished guests. We have benefited a lot from what they have presented. I am here to try to adapt some of what has been said and also to offer a testimony, so to speak, an observation at a distance, so to speak. As someone who is concerned and interested in Hezbollah and who's an optimist of Hezbollah, but not affiliated with Hezbollah. Of course, I am an optimist in Hezbollah without saying that this optimism would do Hezbollah much good, be it given that Hezbollah pays a lot of price for its choices. And I'm not here to represent the Tunisian people or Tunisia, but I believe that the popularity of Hezbollah in Tunisia is on the rise, although over the past years there have been enormous efforts to destroy and devastate the image of Hezbollah, which has improved magnificently after the war of 2006 at the regional level. I am here to offer a testimony at a distance, as I mentioned, is to approach the phenomenon of Hezbollah. It is important to look from different perspectives. Some people see things from within Lebanon or within Hezbollah itself, and others see and regard Hezbollah from an Islamic or Arab perspective, and others evaluate it from an even broader perspective. Hezbollah has accomplished very important issues, and it has created a shift, a multidimensional shift into transformation. We're not talking about a party that has evolved. It has come along by a sort of a mutation, so to speak, a mutation, a qualitative mutation. It has transformed the geography of Lebanon from one of fragility to one of strength, from weakness to strength, and shifted the Islamic scene from a broken, defeated, saddened character to a strong affirmative character. How can we evaluate Hezbollah? If we evaluate Hezbollah itself, we look at it and its plans versus its accomplishments. If we use this methodology or this approach, which is to compare between the plans and the accomplishments, then Hezbollah is exceptionally successful. We can also approach Hezbollah by comparison with other Islamic movements, as Hezbollah is an Islamic movement, and there are many Islamic movements across the Arab and Islamic world. And if we are to compare this with others, what are their plans and what they have accomplished, and what Hezbollah has planned and what it has versus what it has accomplished, I believe that in here we would come to a great contradiction. There is a scene of success represented by Hezbollah and another represented by other Islamic movements which are defeated and failing. Of course, Hezbollah started in the mid of the 1980s. It's not in its young ages, and it's not in its middle ages. If we compare it to the Muslim Brotherhood, which it started at the late 19th century or the early 20th century. And the question, of course, and this is our point of interest, is why? Why has Hezbollah been successful politically, and why is it successful in comparison with other Islamic movements and other political movements? There is an important issue, I believe. As an ummah, we are seeking to regain some dignity, some glory, some presence in the world. This is our collective shared crisis, but the manifestation of this differs from one school to the other, from one area to the other. It differs in both quantitative and qualitative means. I believe we all look for what the Holy Quran says, which represents a cultural and religious point of reference. The Quran says, Al-Bunyan al-Marsus, the building that is coherent in its building blocks. And we forget that this building can only happen through good engineering.
So this is a creative engineering, and from this engineering we can move to building, and this building will be a strong fabricated one. I believe that Hezbollah managed, and or he is succeeding to a large extent, that it is successful in the engineering, and it is looking for the strong building or the strong structure, and it is looking for the good coordination. But this sequence of this engineering is different from the approach of others, and here it has a huge difference from other groups. Why Hezbollah is successful? Of course, the explaining this relation with or explaining the success with the relation with Iran can explain part of it, but not all of it, because at the end of the day, those who sacrifice, fight, and build strategies, tactics, and work are not the Iranians but the Lebanese, which means that Arabs have the capabilities and they can succeed. What do I mean by this link? This link is the mentality or the jurisprudence. We have the wide visions, the ideas, the values, and there is narrower understanding of that, which is the religious mentality. Of course, we are religious communities, but in what sense? There are schools of religion or belief up to reaching the political jurisprudence. So there is the mind that builds the visions, and there is the religious brain, because we are religious communities, and there is the political brain. I believe that Hezbollah is distinguished compared with others with these different levels. As I said, this has to do with the explanation, has to do with the engineering. In this wider mind or brain, the mind or the brain of Hezbollah is a brain that looks into the future. It is well established. It looks at the future. Other mentalities, which is not the one of Hezbollah, of other movements, it is nostalgic. It looks at the past. We heard a lot in the past years in relation with the Arab Spring. There were a lot of philosophers and thinkers in our Arab world who spoke about the resumption. You cannot resume if you want to resume with a nostalgic mind. If you want to resume, you have to resume with a forward outlook. And this is the mentality of Hezbollah and others. Now, if we look at the religious jurisprudence, because Hezbollah has an Islamic background, it seems that in the minds of Hezbollah, I don't know if this has to do with the Shia mentality of Hezbollah or others. In the mentality of Hezbollah, they always say that Islam is coming. So, and it is awaited. And the glory of Islam is a project, is not looking back in history or about the remnants of the glory of in history. So the relation with Islam is legend, is an epic relation, not a tragic relation. So we're not looking for a glory that we have lost, but rather looking at the glory that we want to build for people. So this is at the level of the mentality, at the level of the ideology. This is very important.
This epic dimension, rather than one that is based and rooted in back looking, is essential for the character of Hezbollah. At the same time, Hezbollah is a political movement, but it seems that it is a political movement that is not obsessed by politics, is not greedy as a political actor. Everybody can see that Hezbollah controls the situation politically in Lebanon and beyond, but it does not govern. It bases its bets on the credibility it has with the people and the trust it builds day after day with the people, and it is based on a wide audience and a wide constituency, and it hence morally leads without obsession with power. And this is probably related to them being Shia, because our Shia brothers have lived a history of resistance against governors and against rulers. The model of governance with Hezbollah is not the model of the caliphate, which resumes, or the caliph who resumes the caliphate, which is an obsession for other Islamic movements and Islamic states, such as Turkey with Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Let alone that the model is the spiritual leader, not the caliph, not the emir or the prince, not the sultan. Of course, this may change because the Shia brothers are moving from being in the opposition to being the rulers, and the experience of power may change gradually their political jurisprudence and then religious jurisprudence and then their rationalization of governance. In Tunisia, for example, in the 1980s, there was a term used in the Islamic movement. They called it the protesting Islamic or the opponent Islamic movement, which was a more or less a social Islamic movement. But as for their power model, there was an obsession to rule, to take power, to take control. And we have seen that when after 2011, the first thing that came to the mind of the Islamic movement was to grab power, and it was a major issue, to be honest. And through Hezbollah, we are at the beginning of the way. What is achieved by this party is not little, but what is coming forward is even greater, God willing. And it is important to network in this cultural and civilizational undertaking that requires Hezbollah more networking and more levels of working within the Islamic and Arab culture, because the conflict now is becoming globalized. I believe that Hezbollah, regardless of the madhab differences and the geographic differences, is successful because of the positive engineering, if we are to use that term, and this requires a lot of efforts, and this phase remains a critical phase. Is it possible to accomplish what Hezbollah is accomplishing and what Hezbollah has been successful in doing within a circle different from the Shia madhab, the Shia circle? I believe that, and I'm here taking a guess, I believe that it is not possible on an Arab level or even on a Sunni level, it is not possible to come through this engineering except through the Sufi school of thought, through the religious jurisprudence of Arab Islamic movements, and through the Arab Sunni Islamic movements. I believe otherwise that we are getting further from this so-called happy engineering, and hence we are not any closer to the coherent building that I started off with. But having said that, the Sufi thought is not also ready, or the situation is not ready and prime for it to take steps forward to reach this happy engineering and coherent building. Thank you for this intervention and for the questions you posed. I now give the floor to our speakers to comment, and also our participants virtually for any questions or... Yes, please go ahead. Please use the microphone. Does it have green light? Yes. Is the green light on? Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this session. Actually, the Hezbollah experience is one of the richest experiences from which we could learn a lot. But it is clear that this session has all been about the positive side, and there are some negative points that we have disregarded in terms, for example, of interaction with the West, in terms of the strength and not giving up armament. The dimension related to the Iranian revolution is an important dimension in the Hezbollah's interaction with the West. And this, I believe, has been an important factor. And Hezbollah is also quite pragmatic and flexible in interacting with internal actors and being aware of its own standing and other standing. And this is a positive issue, which is it has been able to interact with other Islamic movements in Lebanon by providing an approach, a political approach that's quite pragmatic, even that run contrary to its religious convictions sometimes. But Iran was a major player and actor, and it has resolved the disputes between the jurisprudence in the 80s, and also it intervened with funding and logistic support to Hezbollah in order to take control of Hezbollah in service of Iranian interests, at the same time maintaining it as a more resistance movement and as a Lebanese actor. At the end of the day, there are rising powers in Islamic movements, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Taliban, that are very important to be studied in order to understand how they interact with the West, and also how they can come up with successful models to overcome the Western influence in the region. But an important issue with Hezbollah on a value level was its involvement in Syria and the many massacres it was implicated in, which has blown its legitimacy a major, or given it a major blow. And we have to say that since 2000, the Israeli occupation had been on the decline towards Lebanon. But if we look from the complex theories, we would find, and we look at a number of factors, several factors, we find that in the middle and long term, Hezbollah will face many problems because it has expanded at the behest of Iranian regional influence in the region, in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, and some of those problems have come to in broad daylight, and especially with the ease of access to information. So young people are more aware now of the value system on which Hezbollah is based. And it is important to point out that there is no civilizational model that Hezbollah can offer, and it is based mainly and only on Wilayat al-Faqih, and Iran maintains the upper hand in controlling Hezbollah, basically. The final thing I would like to say is that the new emerging generations of Hezbollah are very different from those who emerged in the 80s, who had a strong conviction and doctrine compared to the new generations who have been implicated in Lebanon, in Syria. And they ask themselves the question, why are we intervening here to support Iranian interests, and how is that related or in service of liberating Jerusalem? And also this puts the internal legitimacy of Hezbollah in Lebanon at stake, which caused many inside Lebanon to be more daring in their critique of Hezbollah, because there is an increasing understanding among young people that Hezbollah is one of the tools of Iran in the region, which defeats and defies the image of Hezbollah. This is not in contradiction of Hezbollah's, that in Hezbollah's conflict with Israel, people would be compassionate and sympathetic with Hezbollah. But this image of Iran in the background would always be present and pose major questions and push many entities to neutrality in dealing with this scene. If we are to compare this in Egypt, for example, if there is a disagreement between the Egyptian president and Israel, people would pose many questions about the legitimacy of the army with the massacres it has been involved in, with Rabia and other problems. So, and the medium and long term, this is going to cause an accumulative crisis, which in the future are going to cause changes or shifts that come all of a sudden from this accumulation, like the revolutions that happened. Like we realized that that Israel was on the decline since 2000 in Lebanon. The same applies to political parties which follow the same model. Thank you so much. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad. Thanks for the invitation. I would like to start with the same point as Mr. Shadi. I would have hoped for the commentator and the speakers in addition to highlighting the accomplishments and the advantages of Hezbollah, to also talk about its disadvantages and problematic aspects, and we have none of the kind in their presentations. So my intervention is mainly a number of questions. First of all, what is the future strategy of Hezbollah in its interaction with the Lebanese state and with the Israeli occupation and with Syria and Iran? And also another question is, what is the relation between Hezbollah and the Sunnis in Lebanon? Lebanon is a country or is a state that is based on a multi-sectarian community and a division of power between those communities, as the president is Christian, the speaker of the parliament is Shia, and the head of the government is Sunni. Is there any degree of competition, coordination, or compulsion between the Sunnis and the Shia, and what is the degree of intervention by Hezbollah in Syria? I would have hoped to hear something about this in the speakers' interventions and presentations. And my other question is, what's the future of the military relation between Hezbollah and the Lebanese army, as Lebanon is a state with a formal army, and what's the relation between Hezbollah and the official Lebanese army and the military arm of Hezbollah? Finally, my final question is, what is the position of Hezbollah? This is something mentioned by Mr. Shadi. What is its position in the sectarian strife between the Sunnis and the Shia, which has become very visible in number of dimensions and number of places? I would like to acknowledge that Hezbollah has indeed been created or achieved certain accomplishments over Israel, the Zionist entity, and broke its vanity and hegemony. But there are other examples as well, as Shadi mentioned, such as the Palestinian resistance and Taliban. And actually, even outside the Arab and Islamic framework, we have Vietnam, who have been able to break the American superiority with their perseverance. So if Hezbollah requires a more in-depth and more comprehensive study in order to understand it better and have perspective for its future. Anyone else would like to intervene? Please go ahead. Actually, it's working. I wanted to respond to Mr. Shadi and the other commentator. Actually, I agree that there has to be another perspective that talks about the disadvantages of Hezbollah. However, it is, if this is necessary, it has to be not based on media outlets, because media outlets are not fair towards any fair or just causes in the region. There are stereotypes. Unfortunately, Mr. Shadi is speaking like he has been studying or has been living through this experience, and I believe that this is not true. Hezbollah, like any party, has advantages and disadvantages, but in the basic, essential issues, like the doctor said in terms of the Sunni Shia strife. On the contrary, Hezbollah, on the eve of the elections, all opinion polls show that the largest Sunni bloc coming into the parliament is the one that is allied to Hezbollah. So I believe that most of the things said about Hezbollah in outside or abroad is by way of propaganda, which is important. It's part of the war against it, like the one in Hamas, like the one on the Muslim Brotherhood. It's part of the confrontation with the enemy, and this enemy is not going to be, at the end of the day, in its media outlet, it's not going to be fair or truthful. So I believe that it's okay to criticize Hezbollah, but do not repeat what you hear from enemy media outlets. What's said against Hezbollah is said about Hamas, is said about the Jihad al-Islami in Palestine. I'm surprised that our Egyptian colleagues who know very well what it means for what media misleading is, they would fall into the same trap in addressing the question of Hezbollah or any resistance movement elsewhere. I have an intervention in the second session, but what I would like to say is that if we echo what we hear in the media, this is far from being academic or reliable. Mr. Shadi, and I'm not defending Hezbollah, I'm defending truth, and the truth is costly for those who stand up for it. You say that there is a difference between former generations and the present generation in Hezbollah. The people we have now are from the newer generations in Hezbollah. This is a statement that has to be objective. When we evaluate any experience, we have to be objective and say what is truthful, even if it's against ourselves. Hezbollah, as well as Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood, are victim of a demonization campaign. When I hear what is said about Hezbollah, about the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, I know that it is not true, because it is a deformation, it's demonization, and the same applies to Hezbollah. All I'm saying, honestly, unfortunately, there is a lack of objectivity in our evaluation of Hezbollah, because if you evaluate Hezbollah objectively, you would be classified, and classification is very dangerous because it may have security threats and repercussions for yourselves. And if you are silent, this may make you colludent in concealing the truth. So what I'm trying to say is be accurate in and cautious about the truthfulness of what you say. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, I apologize for having been late in joining you for special circumstances, but based on the last points made, I would like to comment on what my colleague has just mentioned, which is the comparison between Hezbollah and Hamas. With all due respect to the point of view made by him, this is an approach that totally lacks objectivity. Please give me the chance to comment on this. First of all, Hezbollah is within the Lebanese organization, or within the Lebanese structure. It is a non-state actor that is competing for power, and this is undisputable. Everybody can see it. Please let me continue. I just need 2 minutes. This is one difference between Hezbollah and Hamas. The other is more essential, which is Hamas is concerned with an issue or cause that is related to itself and its borders, but Hezbollah has been implicated in operations and problems outside its jurisdiction and its territory. Most importantly, Hamas is loyal to its cause within its country, unequivocally. However, in Hezbollah, on the language of its own leaders, their loyalty is to Iran, to the Wilayat al-Faqih in Iran, rather than to their nation in Lebanon. So there is an essential difference between Hamas and Hezbollah that makes this comparison null and void. Thank you so much for all of the commentators. We have 15 minutes left. I will give 5 minutes for each of the speakers. You can pick any of the responses or comments or questions that have been posed and made to respond to them. And I apologize because time may not be enough to respond to all that has been said, but due to this time limitation, although we have taken already 2 hours and a half, we might take 5 extra minutes, but please restrict yourself to 5 to 6 minutes at most.
تفتح الكاميرا دكتور.
الصوت واصل أهم شيء. أولا يعطيكم العافية على هذا الجهد وأنتم دائما تحاصروننا بالوقت. وهناك مقولة
we're always a nick of time, and there is something that there is a quotation that I will use here, that if you want to speak for 3 minutes, you have to prepare for 3 hours. So this is problematic for us. The study that I made was objective, and the title was very specific, which was the vision and role of Hezbollah. So the time was not enough to discuss all things, although that I focused I myself, I was trying to be objective, and I wasn't trying to describe anything. Now I can comment on some of the participants, and I welcome what they said, because what they have said is repeated. This is something that we need to take into consideration. First, does the party or Hezbollah wants to control the state? This is not correct. I have conducted a study that included all the documents of the party, which are thousands of pages. We need to differentiate between two things: our comments that might be negative, and what we need to differentiate of what is being published on the media and the realities on the ground. What we see in reality, there are indicators. If just take into consideration, and I mentioned that Hezbollah was away from the state until 2005. In 1993, there was a decision by the cabinet to put the army in the south. So what this comment that was made is a part of the propaganda. The other part, which is the loyalty to Iran, this is not correct. I mentioned that there is a problem in understanding Wilayat al-Faqih. Wilayat al-Faqih is a religious, political one in the general sense of the political word. Even those who are against Hezbollah, they understand that there are a lot of newspapers, and I read the newspapers every day for 7 years. Especially the Saudi ones, I read that, and they use the same cliches all the time. This is a sad thing, because they are not telling the truth. In terms of getting into Syria, and at some point I had a role in communicating with the Muslim Brotherhood and some other movement. And very shortly, and I know that we don't have a lot of time to get into a lot of details, but we need to say that the resistance in Lebanon, it has a very important, a high moral reputation, and there is not a single civilian was killed in its operations inside Lebanon or outside Lebanon. Of course, there is a problem in the propaganda. There might be military problems. I am a professor in the international law, but these mistakes are repeated because there is a kind of religious a religious commitment in that issue. I talked about the difference in generation. This is a normal sociological thing, but whether they are less taking initiative or more, this is not correct. And the war in Syria is evidence of that. Another point I will conclude with, I can't recall all the comments. I also wanted to have some higher level of objectivity in the comments, other than the cliches that we hear here and there. To talk about the future prospects, I believe that there is an important experience in Lebanon. I hope that there won't be sectarian to have any sectarian differentiation, because in the time of sectarian problems, any categorization is a kind of incitement against certain groups. So I hope that not to hear any such incitement. So I believe for the future, we have a question that is raised to Hezbollah under the pressure that it is lying under. I talked about the civic aspect, to what extent it will be able to manage that and to talk that, because it is an important, this is a problem, and most of the Islamic movements, they have a problem in managing these issues, especially the economic ones. I don't know why most of the Islamic movements have a problem in its economic aspects. We need to improve putting the groundwork of the reality, of the jurisprudence of reality, these movements and their ability to continue or to get into governance. They have less capability to do that. I am not affiliated with Hezbollah, and there are a lot of issues that can be said, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much. Now we move to Dr. Bilal Al-Laqis. Doctor, are you there? Seems that we lost him from the connection. Dr. Mahmoud.
حقيقة يعني كل حركة تدخل في حقل التجربة
any movement that gets into the field of experience is prone. We can hear him well. Someone is unable to hear him, maybe because of your connection. Are you on the Arabic channel? We can hear him very well. Try to go in and out. Maybe you will be able to hear. Go ahead, Dr. Mahmoud. We can hear you.
الحقيقة هناك
أنا لا أسمعه. كنت أستمع بالإنجليزية.
I can't hear him.
نعم نعم.
الآن أسمعه.
Now I can hear him.
يعني هناك الحقيقة يعني إشارة وهذه
So there is, in a lot of meetings, we can hear that in a lot of conferences, people who are impacted by the media, and if there is an academic research conference that is trying to look at things as they are, we see this influence of media even amongst those the people or the elites, even if they have position. Any researcher can have a position or an opinion, but they need to have distance, or to distance themselves between themselves and the topic that they are talking about, in order to see it from its different aspects. If things are only about describing this phenomenon to build a discussion on it, it's not necessarily, or it's not necessary to get into the day-to-day details that are usually prominent or dominant in the public opinion. Unfortunately, the mass media managed to formulate the awareness of the elite that is supposed to look into the events in depth in a strategic point, from a strategic point of view, and to look into all aspects of the events. Unfortunately, we see that the elites are falling into the trap of getting into the details and building on those details as a criterion for conclusions of the entire issue. This is one of the problems that should be taken into considerations, maybe through two main points at the methodological point of view. The first one is that the conferences or organizers of such conferences should specify the levels of discussion to be focused on the main points that can activate the ideas and that can help to open the space to engage in ideas without limiting the discussion into sharp points or controversial points that will not lead to any results. In the beginning of my paper, I wanted to move from what is prominent on the daily basis to something that is not touched upon a lot in the discussions that we see. We are in a historic moment that we need to move from what is in the general or in the mass media to a decisive point, because we are facing a very important point in history, which is which will impact our destiny, the bright destiny of the Palestinian people. This requires to overlook a lot of things that are problematic to discuss the general image. I look at things from the point of view of the sociologist and the researcher who looks at the phenomenon as is. Of course, each phenomenon has its own advantages and disadvantages. This is a normal thing in the course of history of movements or any phenomena that produce ideas or produce changes, such as the phenomenon of Hezbollah. I believe it is time now to employ such conferences at such an academic level to discuss issues on that level that I mentioned, pondering this experience and distancing ourselves from issuing judgments on the values that prevents us from pondering the creative aspect of any phenomenon. That's what I wanted to make on the methodology of such conferences. Thank you. I would like to thank all the speakers for their interventions, Dr. Ali Fadlallah, Dr. Bilal Laqis, Dr. Mahmoud, and Dr. Mahmoud Haider for their papers in this first session, and Dr. Hadi Mansur for his comments. Now we will have a half an hour break, and then we will get back to the second session. And the second session will be about the lessons learned and the prospects for the future. We will have Dr. Hakam Amhaz. He is an academic and a political researcher and media researcher in Lebanon. And we will have Rashid Karkar. He is a lawyer from Al Jinan University in Tripoli. And we are going to talk about the prospects in the Lebanese context. And the third one will be about the lessons learned and the prospects of the future between the politics and resistance with Dr. Al-Rantisi from Al-Ma'arif University in Lebanon. Thank you very much, and we will get back at 3 o'clock Istanbul time. Thank you very much.